And I think that that's something that actually so much like strengthens your, not necessarily self-esteem or sense of self-worth when, yeah, your sense of self-worth is fine when those two things do actually come together, when you can actually say to yourself that my idea of who I am is the same as it is acted out in the world. And I think the best way to think about, or the way I often think about that is, would others describe me in the same way that I think, like that I would describe myself? Like, is that how they see me? And I think that's something that's
There's
interesting.
another one on that that's actually equally as good, and I can't remember who said it originally. I know Jordan Peterson basically repeated it recently, or Jordan Peters, whichever one it is. I can never remember between the Jack guy
Jordan
and
Peters.
Jordan Peters. But anyway, whichever one it is, the non-jacked one.
Jordan Peterson. Yes.
Jordan Peterson, he did repeat it recently, but basically it's the concept of, are you actually a good person or are you just a harmless person?
Hmm.
Right? Like if you are a good person, that means that you have the ability to do evil, right? Because you are choosing actively, choosing to do good rather than to do evil or to do bad, right? If your only option is to do good, right, because you're harmless, like you could never actually harm someone, you could never hurt someone, you could never, meaningfully impact someone's life negatively, like you're not a good person, right? Like you might think you're a good person, but you don't actually have the capacity to do evil because you are a harmless individual, you aren't able to hurt someone physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever, because or for whatever reason. And as a result of that, you think you're a good person, but you've never actually had to exhibit goodness. You have never actively had to choose goodness. You have just passively chosen goodness because you cannot do harm to another person. For example, like, why do I follow the law? Gary, why do you follow the law? Right? Like why? Like you're a big enough guy. You do jujitsu, you know how to fight, you know all these things. Like, why don't you just go in and take whatever the fuck you want? Right? Or just buy a gun and now you're stronger than everyone, you can fucking shoot people. Like, why don't you do that? Right? You don't do that because, again, you want to be integrated in the society, you want to be someone that's actually a good person. And yeah, okay, there's downsides to that, like every trade-off or every deal, there's a trade-off, but you've chosen that path. And I know a lot of people obviously would also say, like, oh, I've chosen the path not to buy a gun or not to do whatever. But in reality, again, you wouldn't know where to get a gun. You wouldn't know where to do any of this stuff because, again, you are just passively going along with the fact that you are harmless.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something that I was going to repeat there. Oh yeah, a kind of a softer example here, rather than going into, like you could be a Nazi prison guard type thing, would be, what was I going to say there now? Oh yeah, a classic really soft example of this is like the way that people judge celebrities. I think this is a great example because people often judge celebrities because they, let's say, they're overindulgent with their spending or their drug habits or this, that, and the other, whatever it happens to be. People are very judgmental of that, including me, to be honest, And I think a lot of people are like, they see people buying yachts and they're like, oh, that is disgusting. That's despicable. There's people starving. But you actually haven't, you don't really have a right to judge that because you've never actually, you're not able to do that. Like saying that you wouldn't do that is irrelevant because you're not able, like you do not have the money, you do not have the choices, the resources to be able to do that. It's very similar to the
You
violence
see people
example.
like, they win the lotto and all of a sudden it's like
Yeah,
hookers and blow.
they're the worst. Yeah. People just absolutely blow all the money that they win. And it's funny because people often think that like there's a certain point at which then I would become a philanthropist, right? Like you win €100. What would you do with that? You're like, oh, I'd go and buy myself some new shoes, or and then okay, €500. Oh, I've been thinking about upgrading my laptop. Okay, what about 1,000? I do need a new iPhone. Like that is, while it seems a lot different because you're talking in sums of like hundreds of thousands and millions, it's the same fundamental decision at the bottom of it. Why did you not decide to go just leave the iPhone and actually give it to just someone on the street if you're such a good person? Because the reality is that we're not always as good as we like to think, or at least we would struggle more with those difficult decisions if we had the resources to have to make those decisions. So it's very easy to sit back and, judge others who have the capacity to do certain things that you're not actually able to do. And often we're most judgmental of those people because we know that the more pedestrian decisions that we all have to make each day, we struggle with them. It's one of the reasons that if, you go to confession on a Saturday in any Catholic church, you'll see that there's plenty of people going to confess their sins because there's lots of people that are doing things that they know go against their conscience each week or each month or whatever. And that's the same for anyone, whether you're religious or not, So that's something that is, as I was getting back to, I was going to tie it to a fitness example where when your kind of sense of who you are in yourself, when that's really well integrated with how you're acting in the world and how other people would describe you from outside, that really strengthens your self-worth. A classic example related to fitness is when, like, I have a number of clients who are trainers themselves and advise other people about nutrition all the time and have great nutrition knowledge, but they really struggle with things like binge eating and their relationship with food. And that's such a difficult thing for them to take because they feel like the way they're acting in the world is discordant with their sense of self, because their sense of self is, I'm the health guy, I'm the nutrition guy, and that's who I am, but I can't keep it together. So that's something that's actually quite difficult for people to reconcile. And that's not to say that there's a specific fault or blame to be put on them, because it's a difficult thing. People go through significant struggles with their relationship with food, and that's something that can be difficult to overcome. But that example could be put into many other areas of life. Some people will consider themselves to be, hard workers, motivated, disciplined people, and they'll put that image out online, for example, on social media. But then if you were to actually go to their workplace and ask people what they think of their performance in work, they might say, he's always on his phone posting quotes and stuff. He's never working, And if you can get those two things to act together, I think that really can strengthen your sense of self-worth, make you a more happy person probably, and give you a bit more stability in your life.
100%. And just a further one as well with that, and you did kind of mention it, it is like, reading books as if you are the bad guy, or reading books as if, especially historical narratives, where you're like, oh, what would I do in this situation? And I don't just mean that, like, you're watching a movie and you're like, well, what would you do in that case? It's like that kind of like throwaway type question. I mean, like actually sitting down and being like, okay, well, look, let's actually go through the scenario here. Again, you're a German and you have Jewish neighbors and they've always been a little bit richer than you. You've always been a little bit envious of them. Then the Nazis come around and they're like, you know what, all your hardships are because of the Jews. That's, it's their fault, right? And you're kind of like, oh, you know what, actually, I can get down with that because it absolves me of my sins. I don't have to, like, the hardships are not because of me, it's because of them. It's the other person that caused it. And then they start talking about, like, actually, let's kick them out of here. Like, oh, and if you kick them out, like, you can get their house, you can get their riches, and you can do that. And you're like, oh, well, you know what? Actually, I think I will do that. And like stuff like that. And you think that wouldn't be you, but history would say differently because it has repeatedly happened. Obviously, the classic example is the Nazis, but it's happened loads of places. Ukraine is probably an even better example than the Nazi. Whatever you want to call it, Holocaust. Like, Ukraine is probably a better example. It also happened even in like stuff like the Balkans in the 1990s. It was very fractured society. Like, how would you react? Like, you might have gone to school with some people, but now you're the enemy or they're the enemy. It's like, how do you react? What are your thought process? What is your thought process now? Because again, it comes back to that. It's very easy to believe you are someone when you've never actually had that, or have never actually had that challenged. It's never actually been put to the test. It's just a case of, oh yeah, I would do better if it was me, like, oh yeah, it would be easy, but in reality, it wouldn't be, right? So that's another example. But bringing it back to the overall topic of the podcast, you do need to spend some time and actually be a bit introspective and actually, again, integrate this mind body duality into a fucking coherent human, right? And you're never going to get it perfect. I'm not saying like me or Gary are bastions of, perfection for
Certainly.
sure. I know both of us are actually idiots. But we spend some time, we've thought about this stuff, like we read books, we do stuff, so I would like to think that we are a bit more integrated than a lot of other people, and especially because we do talk to a lot of other people and we see these things time and time again. And even though our coaching is more focused on the health and fitness side, oftentimes, and again, you can read this through our testimonials and stuff, you'll see people say stuff like, oh, I'm actually doing better in life now, I'm actually doing better with X, Y, and Z. That's beyond the scope of just the like calories and macros and here's your workout program. Like there is more to it, right?